here, Alculita. Today I'm going to tackle about one of the third part of chapter 6, which is the ethics of taxation. So let's take a closer look. So before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube page. Okay, so let's start. So the power of taxation is an inherent power of the state. So it rests upon necessity, the significance of which it stems from the recognition that since governments have established to promote and protect the general welfare, it is necessary that government should be provided with the means by which it could carry out its exercise the power of taxation. Okay, so government financial operations are well nigh impossible without taxation. So because the taxes are the blood, it's the blood of the government. No, the government cannot fully function itself without without taxes. So apart from this, taxation can be a powerful means in order to achieve the goals of a social progress and the objectives of economic development. Okay, so taxation is very important to maintain the society we live in. People are always criticizing the government for this, but it is very important. Okay, so let's proceed now to the meaning of taxation. So the word tax comes from the Latin word taxare, which means to heap up, to describe, or even to tax. So with the historical background, the Romans were not the first civilization to impose taxes on their citizens. We know the ancient Greeks and Egyptians levied taxes on their own people and foreigners, as did the Hebrews. Other civilizations also left records of tax keeping, along with many names for the fees they assessed. Taxation is the supreme power of the sovereign state through its law-making body to impose burdens or charges upon persons, property, or property rights for public purpose. It is the power vested upon the legislature for the purpose of raising revenues to finance government expenditures and for the general welfare and protection of its citizens. So, therefore, taxation is the state power that is exercised only through the law-making body of the state or the legislature. So, in our Philippine laws, the legislature is the law-making body of the branch of the government. So these are the Congress and the Senate. Okay. Neither the President nor the judiciary has the power to impose taxes. So taxes are levied by Congress by means of laws. Okay. So taxation is the method of apportioning the cost of government among those who, in some measure, are privileged to enjoy its benefits, but must therefore bear its burden. Okay, the last one here. Taxation does not confine itself on government expenditures. It also regulates the flow of income in our economic system. Where there is too much money in the system, the government withdraws some of this money to check the inflation. Okay, so let's proceed now with the moral view of taxation, the ethical and philosophical view of taxation, and let's start with utilitarianism. Okay. For utilitarianism, the most important economic goals are to ensure that the goods and services are available to allow everyone to have a decent life, and to ensure that these resources are distributed widely enough for all or most people to enjoy them. A true utilitarian would only care about total satisfaction, not about the evenness of its distribution, but with taxation, we're discussing the distribution of resources. Okay? So, if each person has modest resources, that should generate more satisfaction in total than if the same total resources are concentrated in the hands of the few people. So, taxation plus government spending are an obvious way to achieve redistribution to ensure that everybody gets something. However, taxation and spending help to achieve wide resource distribution, but high tax rates of tax reduce investment and incentives, which makes it hard to generate sufficient total resources. Too much redistribution may thus mean too small a pie to share out. So, utilitarians must therefore strike a balance. Okay, so in the previous slide, it talks about the utilitarianism as what you have learned, that utilitarianism aims at for the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But here on this slide, we're talking here about the deontological ethics in paying taxes, no? So unlike the utilitarian, the deontologist does not tell us to make computations. Instead, he or she lays down absolute duties. Therefore, in this idea, in deontological ethics, it is our duty to pay our own taxes. Okay. So, one common such duty is to respect other people's property rights. This could be interpreted to mean that there should be no tax at all. But tax is a forcible transfer of property away from the taxpayers. So here, it is difficult to make this argument in a watertight. Is it realistic to ask people to opt out of using public roads if they don't want to pay tax? They would have to, right? Okay, so let's proceed now with the third philosophical view in paying taxes, and this is on the virtue theory or virtue ethics. Okay, so virtue ethics can be a bit more helpful on the question of the justice of taxation. Several virtues seem more likely to be exercised if tax rates are moderate than if they are very high. One should use one's talents to the full. Financial incentives can encourage people to use their talents, but very high taxation dampens down those incentives by reducing a take-home pay. That is why another virtue here is charity, either in cash or in kind. Okay? So the more take-home pay people have, the more likely it is that they will feel able to afford charitable donations. And the higher people's pay rates, the easier it will be for them to take time away from paid work to perform charity work or other forms of civic service as school governors or magistrates, for example. Now, the third virtue here, the first one is the justice, The second is the charity. The third virtue in paying taxes is the virtue about independence. It is good to earn what one needs rather than to depend on subsidies from others. Lower rates of taxation make independence more easily achievable. Okay, so let's proceed now with the legitimate objective of tax. So tax can be used for all sorts of purposes, and it is often clear what ethicists of any particular kind would say about these purposes. So we can start with the provision of the law and order and more extensive public services such as healthcare and education. The next one here is that the utilitarians will approve of taxation for these things because they allow more goods and services to be produced, and they allow more non-materialistic desires to be satisfied. On the other hand, virtue ethicists will approve of this because these services enhance people's opportunities to use their talents and to lead flourishing lives. And the other one here is that when we turn to aid to the poor, utilitarians will approve because transferring resources from rich to poor increases the happiness of the poor more than it reduces the happiness of the rich. Another thing here is that virtue ethicists will approve of this because with the distribution of the poor can be helped to flourish and develop virtues. And because looking after the less fortunate is itself a virtue, so voluntary charity may be a greater virtue than forced payment. So giving out from your own heart, giving out from love, giving out from charity rather than forced payment. On the other hand, deontologists can recognize a duty to care for the poor. So the greatest of all in deontologists I mention here, Immanuel Kant, certainly believed in duty to the poor, although he did not have a tax-funded welfare state in mind as a response. However, none of this means that any kind of ethicist would favor unlimited provision of any of these good things through the tax system. As we have already seen, one has to consider the consequences of the overall level of taxation. Okay. A more controversial objective is the promotion of equality in the sense of equality of economic outcome. For example, wealth rather than equality of opportunity. Okay, so taxation can very easily be used to make the distribution of incomes and wealth more equal either by transferring cash from rich to poor or by providing the same state services to everyone while taxing the rich more than the poor in order to pay for them. So greater equality may also be an accidental outcome of using the tax system to do other things, but it can also be a goal in itself. Okay, so in this slide, I'm going to give you income tax tables under the latest train law. No? So one of the main objectives here in train law, unlike from the previous law here, is that those people who earn an annual income of 250,000 below will be tax-free. And unlike from the previous one, regardless of your monthly income, if your income is 5,000 or less, that is already tax-free, but beyond that, you'll be given a tax rate. But here in the train law, below 250,000 is already considered as tax-free. But as long as that your income has increased, the more increased the income, the more you are being taxed. That is why it says here that the rich are more taxed, or are more has more to pay in tax rather than the poor ones. Okay, so this is now the one of the controversial issues, no, concerning about the tax evasion as well as tax avoidance. Okay, most taxpayers pay their taxes without fuss, but not all taxpayers act in this way. So lastly, let's look at whether two other forms of behavior can ethically acceptable, either tax evasion or tax avoidance. Okay, let's define tax evasion. Tax evasion involves knowingly misreporting the facts. For example, declaring an income of 1 million when the true figure is 5 million, or declaring that an asset is owned by one company in a group when it is really owned by another, so paying less tax. So if my definition is right, then I could clearly say that ABS-CBN has committed tax evasion. Why? Because ABS-CBN earns an advertising income of 35 million pesos per day. Imagine that, 35 or 30 to 35 million pesos per day. But so per day, if you multiply it to 365 days, the product will be, so for in 1 year they earn 11.6 billion pesos at the end of the year. But how much they pay their tax? Compared to GMA, in 2017, they pay only 421 million. In 2018, it's the government. The government owes ABS-CBN 84 million. And in 2019, they pay only 152 million. See? So it's clearly a tax evasion, no? Despite of earning 11.6 billion in a year times 30% of the corporate income tax. So ABS-CBN with the advertising or advertising income is concerned of 11.6 billion in a year, so they owe the government, they have to pay to the government for about 3 to 4 billion pesos as a tax, no? But here it's a clear sign of tax evasion. Okay, the next one here is the tax avoidance. So the tax avoidance is defined as the use of legal methods to modify an individual's financial situation to lower the amount of income tax owed. So this is generally accomplished by claiming the permissible deductions and credits. This practice differs from tax evasion, which uses illegal methods such as reporting income to avoid paying taxes. So it is using one's knowledge of the tax code in finding loopholes to lessen the payment of taxes. It is not illegal, but others question if it is ethical. So what are some of the ways to avoid paying large amount of tax? You can either decrease your income or increase your deduction. One of the key examples of tax avoidance is by employing and giving discounts to senior citizens and persons with disabilities. Yes, it is also part of the law, no? That it's already part in our law that senior citizens and PWDs have given the chance to work, in a private firm. So employing senior citizens to your business gives you an additional deduction of an equivalent of 15% of their salaries and wages, while employing persons with disabilities entitles you to an additional deduction of an equivalent of 25% of their taxes and wages. Also, giving discounts equivalent to 20% of their purchases less value-added tax can be claimed as an additional deduction. Okay, so what are the benefits of paying taxes? So here, the direct benefit of paying taxes for everyone is that they are used to pay for services that governments provide to communities. In a modern society, a government needs administrators, clerks, police forces, emergency forces, such as firefighters, engineers, maintenance workers for streets and buildings, politicians, and to pay for properly used and goods consumed by the government services. So in ancient times, there were few government specialists, but all of these basic needs had to be met. Another example here is that recently the Senate had released a 2021 budget worth of 4.5 billion as compared to 2020 budget, which is only good as 4.1 billion. Why is that so? It is because they had to increase the budget for 2021 for the purpose of buying COVID vaccines to be available to public for free. Okay, another thing here is that as large cities developed in the ancient world, rulers and their communities had to devise ways to compensate and people who delivered services to the communities. We don't know what the earliest forms of government revenue were, but the options were few until money was developed. As an example, if a city of 30,000 people needed to pay someone to clean the streets, they might rely on the community donations of food and shelter. Temples became centers of collection for food and other donations, and so in many early civilizations, the temples were the leading institutions of the cities. So, taxes are classified as regressive if they affect the poor people more than the wealthy people, and as progressive if they affect the wealthy people more than the poor people. So, progressive taxes have been popular throughout the history, probably because wealthy people were easier to tax and the taxes would weaken their ability to raise their own armies. Okay, so another benefit of paying taxes is to ensure that everyone in the community enjoys the services provided by the government, whether the taxes pay for defense, whether for the NTF-LCAT to end the communist insurgency, whether for infrastructure like the Build program, whether for education to enhance the curriculum of education despite in the pandemic, or to buy or for a budget to allow students uh, to to be given a laptop for online classes, or for public safety. So the intention is that they create a safe and stable environment in which people can live. In practice, this does not always happen. In fact, we can easily find many examples where poor neighborhoods receive less benefit from taxation than the wealthy ones, than the wealthy and rich people. But the reasons for these disparities in the government services are complicated. So the distribution of taxation benefits is not directly tied to the purpose for which taxes exist. So here, in a perfect world, we would only pay enough taxes to ensure that everyone receives equal benefits from their communities. In reality, we pay taxes because that is the most efficient way to provide services, safety, and infrastructure to the large populations. So, what are the basic principles of the sound tax system? The first principle here is the fiscal adequacy. This means that the source of revenue should be sufficient to address the demands of public expenditures. The second one here is the for equality or even justice or theoretical justice. This means that the tax burden should be proportionate to the taxpayer's ability to pay. The best example is the train law, the one that I give you in the previous slide, the table, the tax table, the train law. Okay. Another one here is the administrative feasibility. This means that the tax should be capable of convenience, just and effective administration. Okay, so what are the essential characteristics of taxation? So number one, it is an enforced contribution. So in other words, all citizens are required to pay their taxes. Failure to do so is subjected to penalty provided by the law. Moreover, it is generally payable in money. Payments of checks, promissory notes, or in kind are not accepted. The taxpayer must pay their taxes in terms of prevailing currency, in cash. Next, it is proportionate in character. So collection of taxes is based upon the income, how much income that you have, and the property of that taxpayer. The higher the income, the higher the tax. The lesser the income, the lesser the tax. So the fourth one is this. It is levied on persons, property, or property rights. A person who receives an income based on skills and practice of profession are required to pay their taxes. He is also taxed because based on acquired properties deemed as taxable. Next is, it is levied by the state, which has jurisdiction over the person or property. In real property taxation, so we're talking here about the land. The rule is, the place or state where the property is subject to tax is located has the authority and jurisdiction to impose tax. In movable property, the rule is mobilia sequitur personam. So in Latin phrase, which means movables follow the law person. Okay, another thing here is that it is levied by the legislative branch of the state. There must be a law enacted by Congress before assessment and collection may be implemented. So, the power of taxation may be delegated by Congress to local government units, subject to conditions and terms prescribed by law. So another here is that it is levied for public purposes. It is intended to raise revenue for public purposes. It is considered a public purpose if the proceeds thereof are used for the support of the government or for the welfare of the community. Okay, so that's all, my dear students. So that's the end of my topic. So thank you very much for watching. So please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube page for more videos. Once again, I'm Sean Severe Alquilita, now signing off.